Easter today. And Easter, of course, is the preeminent Christian holiday, the celebration of this resurrection of Jesus Christ. And actually, the resurrection for the Christian faith is the cornerstone for Christian belief. You can have there are a lot of valid criticisms of Christianity. You can ask a lot of questions of it. But the first question you have to ask is, do I believe in this resurrection? Because if you don't, then none of the other questions and critiques or criticisms about Christianity matter at all. The resurrection, if it's true, is the single greatest event in all of mankind, throughout all of history. And it changes everything. Now, here in this community, in this church, I like to use this phrase called being intellectually honest. When I say that, what I mean is that here as a Christian community, we don't just take beliefs and swallow them whole without critiquing them a little bit, without doubting a little bit, without asking some right questions. Being intellectually honest with your faith, with the Bible, is the way in which you engage with God to say, what do I believe and why do I believe it? And on Easter, it's extremely difficult for many, many people to deal with this resurrection of Jesus Christ. To believe that a human being could actually die, be dead for 3 days, and then rise again. So what I want to do first, before we can understand the impact of the resurrection, we have to understand if it actually happened at all. And again, if you have a criticism about Christianity, fine, but first you have to wrestle with this question. Did the resurrection occur? Now, there's a lot of people, and actually contemporary Christians, who will argue that the resurrection story is just that, a story. It's a somewhat of a myth. It may or may not have happened, but the most important thing is that it's a symbol of hope. It's an allegory. It's a metaphor of some sort. If you believe that, if you say that, you're not giving the gospel writers their just due. See, the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, never intended to write fiction. What they're writing about in the resurrection is an eyewitness account. They all say this. So to say that it's a story of fiction is to not do justice to them. It's not fair to them. But pretend for a second that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were writing fiction. This is not the type of fiction you would write. This makes no sense as fiction. There are so many extraneous details in these resurrection accounts that just don't make any sense. When Jesus was risen, they said that he went to fish with his disciples and that he caught 153 fish. Now, why would you include that detail? That's like reading the Odyssey and you have the story of Ulysses or Odysseus, and he's going back from the Trojan War, and he's trying to make it home to Ithaca, to his Penelope, and he's battling the Cyclops and the Sirens, and then he gets off his boat and goes and has a ham and cheese sandwich with a pickle. You would never write that. You would say, Homer, what are you thinking? That's not good fiction. That's called a tangent. It's also not, they're not trying to write fiction because the first person who encounters the risen Jesus in all of these gospel narratives is Mary, a woman. And at this time when they're writing, a woman would have had absolutely no credibility in a court of law to be to give testimony or to be a witness to anything. Do you realize this? If you're Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, and you're writing a piece of fiction and you want people to take it and have it be credible, you would never have Mary be your first witness to the risen Jesus. Okay, well then you say, it must be that this culture, the biblical culture, first century Jews, were superstitious. And they had to believe they believed in miracles and magic and resurrection and all of these things because they weren't enlightened. They weren't educated like you and I am. They didn't have the benefits of science. They were superstitious. If you argue that point against the resurrection, then you have no basis, you have no understanding of history. Because at this time, Greco-Roman spirituality completely ruled out a resurrection. These people believed that when you died, what happened was your soul lifted out of this dirty, defiled body, and you went off into some heavenly ether place, another world or something. They would have never believed it. It wasn't in their worldview. They weren't superstitious. They too would not have believed in a resurrection. And if you say something like, well, they believed that because they were old-fashioned and they were traditional. That was an old culture, and they didn't have science, and they didn't have proper understanding. But we have knowledge now. Let me ask you this. Who in 500 years is going to look back at you and laugh for all the things that you thought you knew? Who's going to look back on our worldview in 1,000 years and say, they believed that? Those silly little superstitious people. See, time makes a fool of every man. If you're going to write them off and say, well, they believed it because that was then, this is now, we know. Take it from Agent K in Men in Black. You can learn a lot from Men in Black, I think. Remember what he says when Will Smith's character, Agent J, just finds out that there's aliens and there's this whole secret network? Agent K sits down and he says, 1,500 years ago, everybody knew that the earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew that the earth was flat. And 15 minutes ago, you knew that humans were the only ones on this planet. Imagine what you'll know tomorrow. See, Agent K knew it. He says time will laugh at all of us. So you can't write off the resurrection as just being a primitive belief. Well, then you say, well, science proves that resurrections can't happen. Okay. But the whole purpose of science, the goal, if you ask any scientist, and if you are a scientist in this room, you know this, the whole goal of science is to explain nature and the natural order of recurring things. This is why you can test a hypothesis in a laboratory. But the resurrection by its very nature is a miracle and thus supernatural. So science can neither prove nor disprove a resurrection because that's not even the goal of science. The goal of science is to prove what's going on in nature. And the resurrection says no. There's one event that happened that broke through time and space. Okay. And then you get into historical criticism. And you can say history shows that a resurrection has never happened and there's proof about it. Well, I was listening to an interview on NPR, and a scientist was arguing against God, and they were having a debate whether science disproves God. And the scientist, who's an atheist, had to say that when he does historical criticism, he says, I have to admit that when I approach historical criticism of any subject, I approach it first with my philosophy about whether that thing could exist or not in the first place. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis I put in your bulletin. I won't read it, I'll just summarize it. It goes like this. Any attempt to understand historically whether something happened or not means that you've come with your bias about whether that thing happened or not to begin with. No historical criticism is completely unbiased. And C.S. Lewis says that if you believe that miracles are impossible to begin with, then no amount of historical data will ever convince you otherwise because you've already philosophically decided it's not possible. Let me give you an example. If I told you that there was a tree that gave birth to monkeys, I know, stupid example, work with me here. At least it wakes you up a little bit. If I told you there's a tree or there was a tree that used to give birth to monkeys, now before you even looked into historically if that's a possibility, wouldn't you first say, I don't even think that's possible? Right then and there, your philosophy has already given you a bias about whether trees can actually give birth to monkeys. So no matter what pictures I show you, no matter how much historical evidence I show you, you're never going to believe me that I know a tree that gives birth to monkeys. And I guarantee you, even if I showed you that tree that gives birth to monkeys, if you've already made up your mind that it's not possible, you'll think it's a trick. You'll think it's an illusion. You'll say there's got to be somebody behind that tree pushing those monkeys out. See, even our experience can delude us. It's like, remember Scrooge in A Christmas Carol when he looks at his old friend Jacob Marley. This guy's been dead, and now Jacob Marley's back in a ghost. And what does Scrooge say? He's looking directly at him, and he says, there's more of gravy in you than of the grave. See, Scrooge was saying, I'm experiencing this, I'm seeing this, but even then, I'm going to rationalize it away. Here's the point. You can believe in the resurrection or not believe in the resurrection, that's fine. But at least be intellectually honest enough to ask yourself why you don't believe in the resurrection. Is it because you're writing off that culture? Is it because you're using historical criticism? At least doubt your doubts. And I'm here to tell you today that if you do believe in this resurrection, as we see with Mary, it changes everything. The resurrection proves that we worship a God who cares. Some people ask, why would a loving God allow suffering? God points to the resurrection to say, that's suffering, and I defeated it once and for all. To see the kind of impact that the resurrection can make on your life, look at Mary. There's 3 things that we're going to go through quickly that Mary did here. First, she made a mistake. She heard a voice, and she felt an embrace. She made a mistake. She heard a voice, and then she made an embrace. And this is what the resurrection's about. First, the mistake. Here's Mary, who's followed Jesus for years, and actually one of his closest followers. And it says that in Luke that Jesus cast out demons from her. He's her teacher. He's her guide. And she's followed him. Now, she's seen every miracle he's done. She's heard every teaching that he's made. She's even heard him predict that he would die and in 3 days rise again. Jesus all the time was saying, I'm going to die and in 3 days I'll rise again. I'm going to die and in 3 days I'll rise again. I'm going to die and in 3 days I'll rise again. Mary gets to the empty tomb and goes, what? I mean, think about it. Mary, you're at the tomb. He's just been saying 3 days he's going to rise. Do you think Mary would say, okay, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Okay, this is starting to make sense. Okay. No, Mary gets to the tomb and she's utterly clueless. Why? Because Mary goes to the tomb of Jesus with her expectations about what and who he should be and where he should be. Mary comes to the tomb with all the information in her head about Jesus, but none of the sensation of knowing him. And this is why she's clueless, staring at the empty tomb, because she has all the information and yet none of the sensation. Nothing has changed in her. Nothing has changed in his disciples. They heard Jesus' teachings. That's great. You could read all the books you want about God. You can pray all you want. But until you have the sensation of him, Easter Sunday will mean nothing to you. Now she looks at this empty tomb and she's utterly clueless because she brings all the information, yet none of the relationship. And she doesn't get it. Now I was reflecting on this week on Mary and sitting at the tomb, and one thing that struck me is her weeping. It says that she wept, and actually this verb in the Greek is a strong verb. It's incredibly passionate. And I started to think, what was going through Mary's mind? What's going on here? And the best way that I can sum it up, I finally got around to watching Les Miserables. I know I'm a cultural sluggard. Don't judge me. This is church. You can't judge me for that. Finally got around to watching it. But even if you don't know the movie or the music, well, you know the song. Fantine singing out, I dreamed a dream, right? Do you remember where that comes in the musical? It comes after she's sold herself into prostitution to save her daughter. It comes after she's cut her hair and sold it to save her daughter. It's come after she's given her 2 front teeth. She's at the lowest point of her life and she weeps. And do you remember what she says? She says, I dreamed a dream in time gone by when hope was high and life worth living. I dreamed that love would never die. I dreamed that God would be forgiving. But the tigers come at night with their voices soft as thunder as they tear your hope apart, as they turn your dream to shame. He slept a summer by my side. He filled my days with endless wonder. He took my childhood in his stride, but he was gone when autumn came. And still I dream he'll come to me, that we'll live the years together. See, Mary was sitting at the tomb like Fantine. Fantine's crying out for her Jean Valjean to come and rescue her, to redeem her, to save her. And Mary is weeping because that's what she wants. She sees the empty tomb and she's hopeless. She's at the bottom, crying out like Fantine that she dreamed a dream, but now her hope is all gone until she hears a voice. Do you notice this? No amount of staring at the tomb. Mary could have waited at the tomb. She's talking to the angels. She's looking right at Jesus and she thinks he's the gardener. It isn't until he says, Mary. This is grace. This is all it is. God and Jesus looking at you and me and saying our name, our true name for the first time, the way we always meant to hear it. He's here to say, I'm much better than Jean Valjean. I'll come for you. I have. And the fact that he says this to Mary of all people is the most staggering point of grace, because Mary, not only, like I said, was a woman considered a second-class citizen, no rights, no social standing, but she was formerly possessed. We would have called her a former mental patient. And because of the town where Mary came from, Magda, it's rumored that she was also a prostitute. Here Jesus looks at the most unlikely witness ever, and he says, Mary, I know you. Now you can know me. And this grace is very difficult for people to accept. It looks unfair, and I'm here to tell you this morning, grace is extremely unfair. And it's not until you and I realize that we have a Mary deep inside of us. Either we come to the tomb with expectations, or we come to the tomb with no hope. We either come to God with all this information and expectations about what he'll do in our lives, or we come to God with absolutely no hope, saying, where are you? There's nothing that you or I can do to bring God any closer to us. That's why Mary doesn't get it. Mary's clueless until Jesus speaks to her. She makes the mistake, she hears a voice, but last, she gets the embrace. Do you notice that he says, when she's hugging him, he says, don't touch me, stop touching me. And actually, he's not saying, oh, I'm too holy, get away from me. We know because later on he welcomes Thomas to touch him, doubting Thomas. He says, go ahead and touch me if you want. No, he's not saying I'm too holy. What he's saying is, you notice what she shouts out? She shouts out Rabboni when she knows it's Jesus. That means teacher. And she's holding on to him. And what Mary wants out of Jesus is the relationship that she's had all along. She wants him to be her teacher. She wants him to be her spiritual guide. And he says, no, I'm much more than that. If you believe that I'm risen, if you believe that I'm actually resurrected, I defeated death, I am so much more than that. I'm your Lord, he says. He says, Mary, you can't touch me. I'm your Lord, and because I'm your Lord, I want to be in control of your life. All your fears, all your anxieties, all your worries are really just a way of controlling our own lives. We've pinned up everything in our control, the ability to know that we're in control of our lives. We have a master plan. And Jesus looks at our 5-year plan and laughs, and he says, stop holding on to me that way. I'm not going to be your teacher. I'm not going to be your moral guide. I'm not going to offer you religion. I'm going to offer you grace. Grace upon grace upon grace. And the minute that you and I can sing out like Fantine, like a Mary, and say, God, I've gone to you with all my expectations, but I'm throwing those away. I've gone to you with no hope, and I'm getting rid of that because you and your resurrection give me hope. And what this proves that the resurrection does, what Jesus says is, since I'm risen, I've defeated death. And a lot of people come to me, and when I talk to them, and they say they have trouble believing in God, because why would a God allow loving people to suffer? Innocent, loving people. But don't you see? The resurrection is proof that we have a God, the only God, who cares about life, who cares about this world. And he says, if you let me be Lord of your life, I want to care for you. I want to care for this city. I want to care for this world because I defeated death to love it. N.T. Wright says that the message of the resurrection is precisely that this world matters, that the injustices and pains of this present world must now be addressed with the news that healing, justice, and love have won. If Jesus Christ is truly risen from the dead, Christianity becomes good news for the whole world, news that warms our hearts precisely because it isn't just about warming our hearts. Jesus says, hold on to me. Don't you get it? Your whole life, you've been in control, and where's it gotten you? You're more fearful than you ever were before. You're more anxiety-filled than you ever were. You worry about that email that nobody responded to. You worry about the nasty thing that somebody said to you in public and that embarrassed you. You worry about not getting ahead in your career. You worry about your spouse. You worry about your relationships. And he says, I am in control of all of that. And the proof is the resurrection. And the greatest part about this is, all it takes is his voice. Can you listen for his voice today? If you've never heard his voice, just pray about that. Think about whether or not he's saying your name for the first time. We believe this. The gospel is this. You and I bring nothing to the table. God brought everything to the cross. And on Easter Sunday, we celebrate the fact that he overcame death. And we have nothing to fear. And the best part about all of this, it's free. Or in the words of the immortal Jennifer Lopez, love don't cost a thing. You didn't think that you'd come on Easter Sunday and hear Jennifer Lopez, did you? It's true. She got it right. His love doesn't cost a thing because it cost him everything. Please pray with me. Lord, help us to see just how much of a Mary is inside all of us. Help us to be intellectually honest enough with ourselves to diagnose our own spiritual condition. And Lord, today, help all of us to hear you say our name, to hear your voice, to embrace you, not as a teacher, not as a moral guide, but as the Lord above everything. And we know it cost us nothing. We know that we cannot achieve this. We know it's by your grace and your mercy alone because it cost you everything. In that, Lord, help us to celebrate. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.